All right, so you're using Google Drive and you want to create a new spreadsheet. I'm going to go over the way to do that. And the first thing that you want to do is just log in to drive.google.com and get to what's called My Drive. So you might not see this priority or shared drives on your screen, but you'll definitely have access to My Drive. So that's where we're going to start. And if you look over to the right, I just have folders in my drive. That's just the way I like to organize because I think everything has a place, right? So this sheet that we're going to create, I'm going to first navigate to the folder that I want to have it inside of. So we'll go to Sheets Help and we're going to say I'm making an expense report. So I'll get to that location first. And then from there, I'm going to click on the plus sign and I'll make a new Google Sheet. All right, so you've made your first spreadsheet. And the first thing that you should do is give it a good title. So what constitutes a good title is it's full of words that you might search for later when you're looking for the file, right? Because Google Drive, you navigate it by searching a lot of times, especially if you have hundreds of spreadsheets. So I'm doing an expense report for the week ending, let's say, today's Monday, 15, yes, I'm counting on my fingers. So we'll say expense report, week ending, 11/18/22. If my math's right, that's a Friday. If it's not a Friday, that's all right. Use your imagination. That's the spreadsheet. And now we'll fill out the spreadsheet. So what I put inside of it, that's not part of this tutorial. This is just how to create it. So give me 1 second. So we've created a spreadsheet. We've jumped to the part where we've already filled it out. And now we're going to go over how to create subsequent spreadsheets that are going to be a little bit faster than creating from scratch every time. All right, so you already have a spreadsheet, and this is for the week ending 11/18. Well, let's jump forward a week in time. Say we want to do an expense report again. Don't recreate this, right? So what you can do is you can just go to File and do Make a Copy. Or if you're in Drive at this point, let's go back to Google Drive. Go to the expense reports, and you could right click on this and go make a copy from here. And what that will do, took a second there, is create an exact copy. So we'll rename it. We'll say expense report week ending 11/25. I'm getting Thanksgiving. Hopefully I'm not working over the holidays, but regardless, all right, we've copied it, 11/25. Let's open this copy and see what we gained by not creating it from scratch. So if you just make a full copy, it retains the formatting, so we don't have to redo these lovely headers. And it retains the formulas, so when summing all the expenses. So all you need to do is select the body of the table, hit delete, and then put in the new information. So that's kind of level 2, if you will, of how to create a new spreadsheet, is taking advantage of what you have. And then what I'd like to think of as the third level is starting with a template. So this would be a pre-made template. Google has a lot themselves. There's also a lot available online. But if we go to New and look at from the template gallery, there's a pre-made expense report already here. If I double click on this, it makes a copy of it, puts it in my drive, and already has a lot of relevant fields. Okay, so it'll have a pre-made formula. That's kind of the bare minimum thing to have on here, right? And then just delete the fields that you don't want. But this will help to make your spreadsheets look more professional, right? So the last thing to do here would be to make sure you just created this. Let's make sure it's in the right place though. So if you go to File and then choose Move, it put it just in my drive. I don't want that, right? I want to have it in Sheets Help, Expense Reports. And when you click on Move here, it will put it where the rest of your files are. And then the last thing to remember if you started with the template is to also give that a good name. So you can copy this template 100 times and reuse it, but as long as you give it a descriptive name, you'll be able to tell them apart. So the first item that we'll talk about is just the title of the file. Typically, you're going to be making lots of different spreadsheets, right? So you want to give it a descriptive name. So this one I called Basics because the point of it is to teach people the basics of Google Sheets. But when you describe yours, use descriptive words, and then that way, a year later, when you search for it, you'll be able to find it. All right, so after you've named your sheet, the largest thing that you'll notice in a spreadsheet is that it consists of this grid, and there are column letters and row numbers. And you should think of them in that order, because if I'm going to talk about this cell, so I will make C3 the active cell, and it just did that by clicking it with my mouse. You call that C3 because it's where column C and row 3 intersect. You can also tell which cell is the active cell by the blue rectangle, and it's also up here in the name box, which we'll talk about in a minute. So spreadsheets can also consist of multiple sheets. Some people call them worksheets or tabs, but we're going to call them sheets. And right now we're looking at sheet 1. So if you move to the right and you click on the next one, here we'll see one that we called fixed reference. Because you can change their names, I just double clicked on it and changed the name earlier. And then this is sheet 3. So these all can work completely independent of each other, or you can reference them back and forth when you make your formulas. Let's go back to sheet 1. And before we go too far, let's just also look at this little triangle to the right of sheet 1. If you want to do something with just this sheet, chances are you'll be able to find it in this menu when you left click on there. Right, so you can do such things as copying it to another spreadsheet, or you could even change the color. All right, so I guess we'll do that just for fun. There you go. If you were to have 100 of them, you could use colors to help categorize them. So those are the essential parts of a spreadsheet you absolutely have to know. And next we're going to talk about the menu, which is this, and the toolbar. So think of the menu as having kind of everything that you can't just type into a cell. So if you want to put a value into C10, you don't need the menu. Just click 55, hit enter, and you're done. But if you want to, say for example, format that 55, you have to go up to the menu. You find a lot of additional utility in these menus, things you can't really do from the cells. So one of them would be formatting. Let's just change it to a %. There's some other common items that are up here is if you want to maybe email this file, print it, or just get rid of it. Right, so we will go back, and the other item at the top is the toolbar. So what you see here, these are all shortcuts to things that are typically also found in the menu, but Google Sheets has made a pretty good guess on what you're going to use the most often. So if we're going to change the formatting again, you can do this faster by just coming up. We'll change it to currency. There we go. The third option that you could find yourself using to work with this data is just to, I'm using a Windows computer, so I'm going to say right click on this cell, and you'll see a list of options that are specific to whatever cell you have highlighted. If I wanted to delete a cell, in this case, it's talking about cell C10 because that's where I clicked from, and I could delete the cell from there. So I just said C10. You can also see that if you go up into the name box. So this name box kind of shows you where you are. So let's hold down the mouse key and select a range instead of just a cell. And now it's telling us we're in C10 to D11. You can also use this to name your range. I'll put a link in the description to talk more about that. But that's something more advanced, and you won't need that when you're first starting out with a spreadsheet. Now this spreadsheet already has some formulas. We will click in D3 where I know a formula is, so we can talk about the formula bar. So the formula bar always shows you the formula if there is one. Let's click in C3, or just a value if that's all that there is. But in D3, you can't tell if that's a formula just by looking on the face of the spreadsheet, but you always can in the formula bar. So when we click on that, you'll see it here. And if you have a very long formula, you can go down a little bit and just hold and drag this so that you can get a little more space to see it. Maybe you wanted that on another line. The formula will still work, but if you have, let's say, an if statement in here, it could be a lot easier to read if you separate each concept onto its own line. We'll put that back and click out of it. Let's highlight another piece of data here. So we'll highlight the range of C3 to C6. to show you what the Explore button does. The one thing that it does is it tries to guess what you want to do. So if you wanted to average all of those cells we just selected, you could just click on average and drag it in your spreadsheet, and now you have that formula. See, I already had that formula, so we'll do a more exciting one. How about max? That will show you the maximum value in this range of 1999. And the Explore button will also try to do some other things for you. Sometimes it guesses what you want, sometimes it doesn't. But it made a graph for us. Let's act like we want that. We'll put that chart right there. Shrink it down a little bit, and there you go. So that's the Explore button. It can be very handy. And if you're first starting out, it's probably a good thing to try to use. Delete that chart. And we'll talk about a few indicators just about the entire file. If I go up, one thing that you can do is star it. So this is maybe a familiar concept to you, but when you're looking through your files, you can have folders, you can have recents, but you can also have items that you've starred. So I left click on starred. You may do that if you don't really have a good place to put it. So maybe you have 1,000 files and you kind of know you're going to lose this one. You can star it, and then when you go to find it later, so if I go to File and Open, if you go to the Star category, you're going to see it there. All right, so that's just kind of what you do with important or hard to find files. You can also move it around. You can move it to a different folder using this functionality. If you left click, it's going to bring up your file structure. All right, so this little icon of a cloud, if you're on a wired connection and you almost always have internet, you're never really going to look at this icon. Okay, but if you're traveling a lot, let's say if you're in a train, middle of nowhere, this may show that your document hasn't been saved for a while. And it will save when you get a connection again, but that can be relevant if you're collaborating with other users because they're not going to see your changes until it's saved. And you can see the last time it was saved by moving a little further to the right, and this was telling me it was saved 2 minutes ago. And if you need to revert back, let's say you made a mistake or some data changed and what you did wasn't relevant, you can click on this. It will bring up your version history and you can go backward in time. This is categorized by day, but you can also expand this. It's pretty granular and it has lots of different points that you can restore to. And if you are collaborating, so I have one other person that's sharing this document with me right now, and I can open up a chat window with this person where we can go back and forth. I could enter something there. Enter, it's going to show that I said that. And if we were to look at this as Michael, Michael would see that and he could reply through there. And now we'll come over to the activity dashboard and move down to the sharing history. So we can see that I made some changes here. And I first created this so just anyone in my group could see it. This is my little company. You may not have all of these options if you don't have a Google Workspace account. So if you're using this personally, it will work a little bit different. But one thing you can definitely do is you can share a link with anyone on the internet. And that's what I've done with this file, and the sharing history will show you that. Let's close this out. You can share this in a meeting. So if you're using the whole Google ecosystem, right? So if you're having a video meeting through Google, you can share the spreadsheet kind of in an integrated way with that. And then this is how you control who sees your spreadsheet and how they can interact with it. So I have another video that I'll link to that goes much deeper into the sharing options. But basically, you can specify who you share it with, or you can make a link and designate how that link behaves when other people use it. So this one is anyone can view it, but only as a viewer. So they can't get editor privileges. So when I share these templates online, I let other people get viewer privileges, but then they can make their own copy, which gets detached from this and use it how they like. And one last thing to pay attention to is this picture in the upper right-hand corner represents the Google account that you're using. If you only have one Google account, this isn't going to come into play very often, but if you have a work account, a personal account, and more, just make sure that you're using the right account here. If you left click on this, you'll be able to see who you are and then maybe see some other accounts that you also have on the computer. All right, so now that you know what the essential parts of a spreadsheet are, let's talk about working with rows and columns and how to move them around and what that means. All right, when you're using a spreadsheet, all of the data sits in a grid of columns and rows. And we're going to talk about what happens when you move items around in this grid, or when you add columns, delete rows, all of that good stuff. So let's just get started in doing some things that will work just fine the way you hope they would, and you really don't run into any problems. This data is arranged like a typical spreadsheet is, right? So this column is all just what the item is called. This column is the number of units, and then each row is a different record under that. So let's decide that we don't want this row 5 in here, right? The way that you would get rid of this is if you come over and left click on the 5 here. On the left hand side of the screen, it will select the entire row. So it's a best practice if possible to do an entire row at a time, so you don't shift just part of a spreadsheet. And if we want to delete this entire row, let's look at the total before we do. So this sum total is all of column E. It's 1,907 now. Right click, get the context menu here that comes up, and just click on delete row. It just gets rid of it. And the formulas are updated as well. So when you look at the row numbers, there's 3, there's 4, and there's 5, so it still goes in order. There's no missing number. And the data that was underneath the row that we selected and deleted just shifted up. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is that any formula that moved adjusted as well. So the formula in E5, this used to say C6 times D6 when it was one row below, but when you deleted the row above it, it automatically adjusted. So another type of adjustment that happened is if you look at the formula in E6, this range used to be E3 to E6, but when you deleted one of the rows from the middle, it automatically shrank the range. All right, so I'll hit the escape key to get out of there. And what we just did was we deleted a row with no problem, right? Everything adjusted. If I delete a column, that can happen here too, depending on what column we choose to delete. So I'm going to delete column B, and I'm choosing this one first because nothing else depends on it. All right, so there are formulas in here, but none of the formulas reference the item. So when I right click and delete column B, everything shifted over and took the place. So column B is still here, but it has different data in it. Now what you need to watch out for when you delete columns and rows is if you delete ones that are involved in formulas. So if I look at this formula, it's taking the values in column B and multiplying them by C. So if you delete column C, let's click on that and choose delete column. Your formulas will just give you errors because it's saying, hey, one of those references that you gave me is gone and I can't do the multiplication anymore because I can't multiply column B times column C because I'm multiplying it times myself, right? So it makes a circular error. And if you have a problem like that, you just left click on undo and it'll be like you never deleted it. If you really want to get rid of this column, what you could do is you could highlight the data in D3 through D5, copy it, right click on it again to paste special and paste it as values. So when you do that and you look in this cell by double clicking on it, there's no formula in here anymore. So the 189.05 is there, and when you delete column C, it stays. So you can use this option if you really want to get rid of a formula, but be careful because if you get one more unit, so you change this to 96, the total won't update because it's not a formula anymore. So a better option, if I do the undo button, and I will come up and do it on toolbar or undo it one more time, is you can right click on C and you can just choose to hide the column instead. So when you hide it, you see this goes from B to D. The formulas still work, but you don't have to look at column C. All right, we'll show column C again. We'll talk a little bit about adding rows, and I'll add it in a way that causes a problem. So we will add empty rows into 6 and 7. That's going to shift the sum formula down to. So I've highlighted these rows. I will right click and I will insert 2 rows above, which pushes this down. And to give a preview of the issue that's going to happen, if you click in this, the formula is still just referencing down to row 5. which isn't going to cause a problem unless you add a row. So let's say we'll come down to 7 and we'll just put a value in there. It doesn't get included in the sum formula. So when you're adding rows, just be careful, make sure the formulas are still doing what you want. And if you have a problem with the ranges, you may have to manually adjust them. So instead of going to D5, you can just make this one go down to D7. All right, we'll delete those right now to get rid of that amount. And we'll move on to the concept of swapping rows. You do the same thing with columns, but in this instance, we're going to do it with a row. And let's say we want to move 3 down below 4. So what you need to do is, this won't work if your mouse is in the grid. You need to go over to the numbers or the letters, numbers in this case. When it turns into a hand like that, click and hold it down, and you'll notice the dark gray line is indicating where this is going to be inserted. We'll just move it down 1, and it'll swap the 2 rows. And in this case, nothing else needs to happen. So you do have to be careful, though. I notice the link to the web page also moved. And I did tell it to move because I grabbed the entire row. But that has to happen if you do the entire row. Because if you just do the cells, you get the hand and you drag it down, but it just overwrites the data. It doesn't swap it. That only works when you have an entire row. All right, so I'll undo that. And we'll talk about one last thing, and this is something that you just need to be careful when you do, is that sometimes you want to delete a cell. So there's a difference between deleting the content in a cell and deleting the cell. So if I just wanted to get rid of this 95, if I hit the delete key on my keyboard, it just goes away. The multiplication updates to 0. Maybe that's what you want to do and everything's fine. But if you delete the actual cell, so we will put a number back in there. Let's just say 55. Right click on it, delete a cell, and we'll say shift left. That took the unit cost, shifted it left, and then the multiplication and shifted it left. Broke the multiplication, and the sum function isn't picking that up either. So when you move from shifting columns and rows to shifting just cells, you're more likely to break the flow of what's happening in the spreadsheet. All right, so we touched on briefly what these ranges were. Let's talk a little bit more about cell references and how you can make them extend all the way to the bottom of the spreadsheet if you want, and you can fix them so that they don't move. So if you're using Google Sheets, a lot of times you'll be using cell references. So a cell reference is just a way to tell Google Sheets where to look for a value. So let's just do a real simple example here. If I just come off to the side of this spreadsheet, so I'm in F8 right now, you can tell this is F8 because F is the name of the column and 8 is the name of the row. You can also see that by going up into the name box here in the upper left-hand corner. And I'll just type a simple cell reference. So you always start them out with an equals. Equal sign is telling Google Sheets, I'm going to give you instructions here. So I'm not just going to type a series of letters or numbers. I'm going to actually ask you to do something. And here we'll do the easiest cell reference there is. We'll just say A1. All right, so all that's going to do is look in cell A1. The blue letters here are already telling you what's going to happen. It's just going to grab the value of A1 and show it. All right, let's hit enter, and it just returns sample data. So that's the easiest way to type in a cell reference, or at least the most intuitive, is just to type it right in the sheet. Let's go up, let's delete that, and we'll hit enter again. So Sheets is ready to get instructions again. We're going to tell it A1, but we'll do it a different way. So we can use our arrow keys to move around. So I went up and then left, I'll go up again, and I got to A1. Hit enter. Sometimes that's easier depending on how you're working with your sheet. You can also go in here and use the mouse. So we can grab A1 that way as well. I'll delete that. And then if you go into a place where Google Sheets would be expecting a formula, so it's using some AI to analyze what you're doing and try to help you out, it might actually just give you a suggestion of a cell reference. So let's go into E7. It's going to be expecting you to sum this column, right? I hit equal and it already does the entire formula. You don't even have to type in sum here. So I could just hit tab. It has the name of the function. It has a cell reference. So it has the entire formula all done for you. So a lot of times that is going to come in handy and you can just use it and move on. But it's helpful to understand what a cell reference is. So if we go back and look in here, it said E2 and then a colon through E6. So what that is, that's two cell references, right? One is the beginning of a range and one is the end. So if you specify one cell reference, use a colon, specify another one, you're telling Google Sheets to use everything in between those two references. In this case, in Sheets does this, I don't know why. It grabbed the cell header also, so it's trying to add the word total that's in E2. That's okay, it's not going to hurt anything. If you want to be real exact though, you can just change that to E3 to only be grabbing the numbers. The result will be the same, hit enter. So those are the different ways to get a cell reference into your cell. So let's talk about the different types of cell references once you're using them. We'll pop this up again and you'll see E3 through E6. If I take that formula and I copy it and then I paste it into D7, actually let's paste it into C7. You don't really want to add up the cost. It probably makes more sense to add the units. That formula adjusted. So we call that a relative cell reference. If I go back into the cell, instead of E3 through E6, it automatically changed it to C3 through C6. So that's called a relative cell reference. And most of the cell references that you use will just automatically be relative. And that's kind of one of the things that makes spreadsheets so powerful, is that when you copy and paste formulas around your spreadsheet, they're smart enough to adjust because they're relative cell references. But you may want to use a cell reference that's fixed. So we'll go over that in this example. We'll go to the worksheet called fixed reference. And there is a link to this spreadsheet. It's in the description of the video. It'll take you to a link to the website. All right. And you can always, let's say, using cell references. So this will be sheetshelp.com/cell references. You can get a copy of the spreadsheet if you want to follow along. You just bring it up and then go to File and make a copy. It'll put it right in your Google Drive. So here's a scenario where a relative cell reference isn't going to work very well for you. So what we want to do is we want to multiply the total in A3 by the tax rate. So we will say, we'll do it the wrong way first. We'll say A3 and then times, and the tax will be in B1, or the tax rate. We'll hit enter. And the tax of $9.45 is right for row 3, but then in row 4, I'll show you what happens. We'll just take this auto suggestion for now. It is right to multiply A4 by the tax, but then the reference to the tax shifted down 1 because the formula went down 1. So that broke the reference. It's not working. It's not pointing where you want it to. So we'll hit escape. We'll come back into, actually we will delete B4 through B6, and we'll come back into the formula that we put in B3. And what we want to do, we want to tell it not to shift down every time we do the formula. So we're going to change this from a relative cell reference to a fixed cell reference. So we can use a $sign to do that, and we're going to fix the row reference. You can also fix the column. Okay, in this case we don't need that because we're not changing the column, so we'll just leave that off. But every row that uses this formula now is going to reference B1. So we'll hit enter again, and it auto suggests different results this time, and these results look right. So we'll hit the check mark. We'll come into B6. And since the reference to B1 is fixed, it's still correctly pointing there in every row. The third type of cell reference that you can use is that you may want to pull in something from another sheet. So in this case, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 sheets in this file. You can call them a worksheet, you can call them a sheet or a tab. No matter what you call them, I'll show you how to reference them. Let's just say we want to pull in something from the unformatted worksheet. The easiest way to do it is to hit an equal sign and then come over with your mouse, go to unformatted and pull in, let's say we wanted this total for some reason in E7. Just click on E7 And you can see it's already building the formula for you. This is a preview of what's going to go on the sheet that we were on. Just hit enter. And there we go. So this is a cell reference to another sheet. And if you double click into it, you can see it's the name of the sheet followed by an exclamation point. That's all it is. There is one trick. If you're referencing the name of a sheet that has a space in it, you have to put apostrophes on each before and after the name. You can do it if there's no space also, but you just don't have to. And that makes a valid cell reference. So this, you could combine concepts here, right? If you needed to copy this down and you wanted to fix the row, you could do that in here. So it's a fixed reference to another worksheet. You hit enter and it brings that value from that worksheet into this one. All right, and the last way to do a cell reference is something called import range. And that's how you reference a cell that's in a completely different file. So there is a formula that you need to use to do that called import range. And it takes the URL of that other spreadsheet. So that's this number that, well, letters and numbers that you see in the address bar. You would get that value from the other sheet, put it into this formula, and then tell it where to look in that sheet. All right, so if you want to see more on that method, I've put a link in the video on import range. Click on that. It's a little bit finicky on how it works, but it's not too bad. I think you can learn it if you need it. And we'll go through one more tip here before we wrap things up, and that is the way to do a kind of a never-ending cell range. So let's say you're continuously adding values onto this table that we have right here. So we'll do a formula off to the side. We'll say we're going to average it. And if you did a traditional cell range like E3 through E6, so I just did that with my keyboard and hit enter. That's all fine and dandy, right? 476. But if I add a new row, and I'll make it really large so it would throw the average off, it doesn't change anything. Google Sheets is smart where you move things around, it can adjust, but if you add rows, you have to be careful. It doesn't always know to put them into the formula. But something that you can do, let's come into this formula and you can say, let's start it at E3, but just never end it. So you can just take the ending row completely off. And as you see, the average went way up. All right, and if I add something more to the end, so we'll just do an even larger number, you'll see the average change. All right, so be careful with this technique because maybe you don't want the range to expand automatically, but if you do, that's your little bonus tip for you. And now let's talk about how to use these cell references and formulas. So we'll talk about the bigger topic of how formulas work in spreadsheets. All right, if you're using a spreadsheet, you can use it as a list. You can use it to record things. But if you want to do anything more, and you can do a whole lot more, you have to learn how to use formulas. So in this video, we're going to go over all the basics about how to use formulas. In this video, though, it's actually a lot different than it would have been 5 years ago. So as you'll see as we go along, Google Sheets offers a lot of help, and you can use it. We're going to talk about how to use that help, but then also how to write a formula yourself, because you'll have to do that as well when you go along, because Google Sheets doesn't always guess right. But we'll start out with this spreadsheet that you see on the screen right now. And you can get a copy of this spreadsheet if you want to follow along. The link is in the description. But what we'll start to do is we'll just add this column of numbers here to get the total units. And there's a built-in function for how to do that. So a function can be part of a formula. So a formula is everything that comes into the cell when we're doing this. A function is something that can go inside a formula, but it's a preset instruction to Google Sheets. So an example of this would be sum, and that just tells Google Sheets to add what you're going to tell it to add. So we'll start out with that easy example. We're going to be in cell C7. So that's column C, row 7. And we'll start out by hitting an equal sign. So you always start out a formula with an equal sign. That's like a shortcut to let Google Sheet know that You're not just going to type a number, you're not going to type text, you're actually going to type a formula. And Google Sheets now is already suggesting the sum formula. So said we were going to sum these numbers. That's the most common thing to do, so that's what it guessed. And we'll just take that guess for now. We'll show you how to do that. So it has written it out in gray. There's one small problem with it, is that it wants to add the header as well. But that won't hurt anything. Since that's just text, it will count as nothing. So it won't throw the sum off. So you could just do what's in here, sum C2. And there's the colon there, which means go all the way through to C6. And it's also telling you the answer already, which is 208. But if you hit the tab key, that will perform that operation. And now in that cell, when you double click in it, or when you look in the formula bar here, but we'll double click in it, that formula is in there. So one of the things to keep in mind about this formula and why it's so much more powerful than using a calculator is if you go up, let's say we'll change 36 to 40. If you look at the total, it is 208 now, it updates to 212. All right, so these functions and formulas, when you put them in, they don't just calculate one time. Every time the spreadsheet's changed, if that change impacts the inputs of this formula, it updates. All right, so let's move on to another very basic formula that you can make. And this one doesn't even necessarily have any functions in it. So we'll go to cell E3. And what we want to do, we have a column of units. We have a column of unit cost. As a matter of fact, let me take these costs. I'm going to change the formatting to make it more apparent that it's dollars. Okay, so now we have our units. We want to multiply units times unit cost to get the total in column E. And we'll do that without a function. We're going to use operators. So what we will do, it already guessed it for me. I wasn't expecting that. We were going to do cell C3 times D3. So the C3, as we talked about briefly before, is a cell reference. Okay, so that is column C, row 3. It has to go in that order. You can't do 3C, you have to do C3. And then when you multiply it, you're just using an operator. So we're all familiar with these. You have the basic plus, minus, multiply, and divide. The divide would be a slash, a forward slash like you use on the web. And there are some other operators as well. They're not really in the basic way that you would use Sheets, so we'll just stick to these for now. But I guess I'll just accept this formula again. So I will hit tab, and we've multiplied the unit cost by the units. So these formula suggestions, if you're not seeing them, I usually have them turned off for the tutorials that I do because I'll be doing something more advanced, but it will suggest that basic formula. But if I was just using these to construct data, I'd probably leave them on. If you go to Tools and go down to Autocomplete, all of these are turned on. So it's auto-completing for me, it's suggesting formulas, it's even correcting formulas. So let's come out of here. But what we want to do now is we have this formula, but we want to copy it down to rows 4, 5, and 6. But in doing that, we're going to see something very important about spreadsheets. But we'll use a shortcut to do it first. So you see this blue rectangles indicating that cell E3 is the active cell. That means that that's the one that the formula bar is here if we want to modify it. And it also means that if we hit enter and start typing, that's the one that we're in. But if you go to the lower right-hand corner of the active cell, you'll see a little square. If you hover over that and just drag it down, it will copy down the contents. But this is the important thing in spreadsheets, is that it adjusts the rows in this case because it's going down. So in row 4, that formula adjusted. It's no longer C3 times D3. It's C4 times D4. And that happens in all different types of more complex formulas as well. If they get copied down, the row numbers adjust. If they get copied to the right, the columns adjust. All right, so now we've used operators, we've talked about cell references, and we've used a function. Instead of summing these, let's say we want the average. Okay, so there's two different ways to get the average. Let's do it the hard way first. So average would be all of them added up divided by all of them counted. right? So the numerator would be what it's suggesting here, but I don't want to grab the header. Let's just make it a little cleaner. So we're going to type it out. Let's do capital letters just to keep the right syntax, but you can do lowercase if you want. And I want to grab E3 through E6 because I really don't want E2. And when I'm counting for the denominator, I definitely don't want to count the word total as one. So we'll make them both a little tighter here. And there's a couple different ways to grab this cell reference, but one of them is to use our arrow keys. So if I just hit up, we'll go up to where it ends. I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'll keep going up to where it begins. And that's a way to grab a cell reference. I could have also typed it in, or I could have selected it with my mouse. Okay, so we have the sum now, and you see this blue font that's popping up. That's telling you if you stop typing the function in right now, that would be the result. Okay, but we're not done yet. We want the denominator. So let's do a /. And for the denominator, I said we want how many items there are. So there's a couple of functions that count values. They count them in different ways. We're going to use the function that counts non-blank cells. One variation would be a formula that just counts the numbers. So you actually could use that with the header because it would ignore it, but this is cleaner. So count A, but let's back up one. What you're seeing below here is called formula suggestions. So it's kind of like when you type into a search engine and it gives you all the autocomplete suggestions. This is telling you all the functions that start with the letters that you've already typed. And when you go down through them, you can kind of look at the descriptions to decide which ones you want. And I want the one that just counts. Well, really, I think I just want count the number of numeric values. But if I use count A, the number of any type of value in a data set, it would give the same result because I have a good cell range here and I can just see it's going to result in 4. But the point of this is not to memorize all the different functions. It's showing you that you can combine functions. So I have the sum function, then I have the operator with the division, and then I have the count function. All of those together is just called a formula, but it's made up of all these parts that we're learning. So for count, it wants the different values. We're just going to give it the same cell range, and this time I'll just type it in, E3 through E6. Hit enter, and I guess the average is $481.97. Now what you could do, and this is the power of all of these named functions, is there's just a function called average. So if you use that function, you don't need to combine two different functions. So we'll use average. I'll show you another way to insert functions. So that help was popping up in the beginning, so we didn't need to do much at all. If you know what you want, you can hit equals and just type it. But if you want to browse them a little bit, you can hit insert, go to function, and they're categorized here. So these are the most common ones, and average is here. But if it wasn't there, you would just go down to math. I think, no, you would go to statistical and go to average. Now, like a lot of the other functions, there's other variations of average. So one important one, and a lot of the functions have this, is average if. So you could say average these if they're over $200. So you only want to look at the average of the higher orders. All sorts of choices here. But we will just select average. And it works like all the other functions. It gives you parentheses, and inside the parentheses, it's waiting for inputs. So for the input here, we'll just do E3 through E6. So you'll notice these cell references that I gave this function are the result of other functions. Okay, so E3 has it's the result of other formulas. It has a multiplication formula in it, so you can feed a formula into a formula. We'll hit enter, and we get $481.97 again. Let's go back. We'll look at another helpful thing that happens with functions is you don't necessarily see when you get that autocomplete is if you're thinking about using average, you see it in this list. You can type it all the way to the opening parentheses, And then you get this little bit different looking screen with the green on it. If you drop this down, expand the details, this will give you a little bit of built-in help for each function. So it tells you, it gives you a description and then tells you about what the inputs are. This can be really helpful if you need more help. If you go to sheetshelp.com, we have pages on most of the common functions. They'll all be there eventually. So you can look it up with examples. So I'll just show you an example here. If you go to sheetshelp.com/average, there's a practice spreadsheet that you can get a copy of, and then videos and examples that you can work through. All right, let's go back to our spreadsheet. And we talked about operators a little bit. So there's the basic plus, multiply, divide, subtract. But there's also a whole host of other operators, but we'll talk about a few that you're familiar with. And they'll come into play in something like what we'll use COUNTIF. So let's look at these values in column E. We'll say we're going to count those if they're less than 200. So I would expect that would return to, could you get the value in E3 and E5. So we will say COUNTIF. And then the range, so you're looking at the entire range of E3, and do a colon, right, to go to E6. So that's a reference, the cell reference is a range. And the criterion in this case is that it is, and you have to surround this in quotes, less than. So less than is an operator. If you want to say less than or equal to, you just put an equal sign after it. And then we will say 200. In that in quotes, hit enter, and it counts 2. So let's look at this table, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make it apparent that the title is a title. Right now it just looks like a piece of data that belongs to the rest of the spreadsheet. So we'll go in A1, which is where it's been typed in, and we'll select A1 through E1. So selecting it before lets you know that Google Sheets, anything that you do right now is going to apply to all 5 of these cells at one time. So first we're going to merge them. So we will go to the toolbar here and just click on merge cells. And now this is just one cell. Okay, so the next thing that we'll do is we're going to go to the alignment and we're going to center the data. So it's looking more apparent that this title belongs to everything, but we'll do a few more things to make it even more obvious. So we will drop down the font size, we'll change it to 14, and then we will also make it bold. All right, so now when you look at this, you can tell it's sample data, right? Next thing that we'll do is we're going to select the entire table. So we're saying that the title is not part of the table, but we will start at the header, which is in row 2. We'll drag all the way down to the footer, which is only in E7. So this encompasses everything that we're going to format next. There's a shortcut here to give us a head start for table formatting. So we'll click on Format and we'll choose Alternating Colors. And it's kind of self-explanatory. What alternating colors does is that it bands the rows with colors, which makes it easier to read. But it also can accentuate the header if you let it know that there is a header. So we've put that check mark here. Actually, that was already there. But we're also going to tell it that there's a footer. So we'll put a check mark there. And if you look at the table, it is a little bit more apparent now that the first row and the last row are different than the body of the table in the middle. All right, that's all we can do with alternating colors. Well, let's just do it in nicer color. Let's change it to this kind of green color. And now we'll click done. So it's looking a lot better. We're going to do a few more things to the header row first. So I would avoid just clicking on the 2. So that's a shortcut way to select an entire row, but then what we do is going to go out to the right 2. So let's just do A2 through E2, and let's make this bold. And then I like to center the headers. That just helps to set them apart. So now that we've done that, we'll do one more thing. And there's an option in Sheets to modify what the borders look like. So the border would be the box that goes around every cell. But if you highlight a range, then it's going to do it for that entire range. So what we want to do, we want to put a bottom border on this header, and that'll put a separation between the header and the body. But we're going to make it thicker. So we will click on this box, come down and choose this third option. Usually the first one's going to be selected, but I had already done the third one earlier, so that's what you want to switch to, that I had already done. And left click on bottom border. And now we're done with the header. I think it looks pretty good. And let's do a similar thing to the footer. So we will select all of that, and we will do, from here, we'll do a top border. All right, because it's between 6 and 7, so it's on top of the range that we selected. And while we're in here, we will also make the footer bold. All right, so it's really coming along. It's looking good. There's one more thing that we're going to do. We want to differentiate between regular numbers and currency. So in D and E, these are, in my case, dollars, because I'm in the United States. You would put these in your local currency, or whatever the currency of the spreadsheet is. But you highlight those numbers. So in this case, it's D3 through D7. Go back up to the toolbar and just click on the currency icon. All right, so that makes that a lot easier to read. And one thing to keep in mind, though, is if you're used to Excel, when you format something as a table in Excel, it also puts nicknames on the columns in the entire table so you can refer to them that way in formulas. Just be aware that that doesn't happen in Google Sheets. And the other thing that Excel does that Sheets doesn't do is automatically applies filters. So if we go to data, create a filter, that'll put it on your table. So if you finish creating your beautiful spreadsheet and you're ready to share it with the world, or just share it with a few people, you can do that through Google Sheets. We're going to show you how to do it right now. And there's a couple different ways to do it. So what we'll start out with doing is we'll just go up to the green share button. So that's always there on any Google Sheet that you create. Click that, and then you get a little sharing dialog that comes up. And this has two general options on it. It's controlling who you share it with. So this would be adding specific people or groups, or controlling just how it can be accessed to anyone that has the web address for it, or the URL. Now we'll start out with people with access, but notice when you pull up your sheet, here it probably doesn't say anyone with the link. I set a lot of my spreadsheets to that so that when other people see these videos, they can also access the sheet. So be aware, if yours says that right now, you may have a setting that you don't want. Mine's that way on purpose. But we'll go up to the people with access. So this right now, this is the main account. This is my account that you're seeing, and it's just showing that it's already shared with me because I'm the person who created it. So of course I have access to it. But what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's add Michael. So Michael is this window on the right. I have them both up so we can see working back and forth. And it's Michael Bazalian. And we'll go into the window that says add people and groups. I know Michael's email address. That's going to be the easiest way. You can also just type his name though. And once you get enough letters in there, it will auto populate, and we'll click on Michael. All right, so now we're at the next step of adding this specific person, and it brings us to this window where we have 3 choices. So these 3 choices are very important, and they go from least permissions to most. So if you give them editor permission, they can basically do anything that you can do in the sheet. So be careful with that, right? If it's a trusted person, maybe you want to do that. But if you're not sure, consider one of these lower levels. So if you just make them a commenter, we'll do that on him just for illustration, but I want that to come back. He can right click in certain cells and kind of ask questions and you can reply, but he can't edit the contents. And then if you make this other person a viewer, they can see the spreadsheet, but they can't change anything. So we'll make them a commenter, and we're going to click notify people, and then we're just going to tell Michael, here's the spreadsheet we talked about. Okay, so this is going to be what goes into the body of an email that's sent to Michael. The last option that we don't need to do is copy link. So that would be to take the link, which is the address, put it on the clipboard, and then you could paste it, say like into a message that you wanted to send him. But that would be redundant with how we're doing it right now, because when you click send, we'll go over to the right. This is Michael's email inbox, and you'll see he gets a notification of it through his email. So when he comes in, so now I'm acting like Michael. I'm over on the right side of the screen. We'll click on this email, and here's a message. Here's a spreadsheet we talked about. And if he clicks on open, then it will bring up the Google Sheet for him in his Google account. We're going to show you another way to do this though before we click on that, is that if we go to his Google Drive, so in this tutorial we're using Google Drive. There are a few other file storage apps that you can use Google Sheets in, or Google Docs or Slides. I know you can use them in Dropbox or Box, but typically you're using them in Google Drive. So I'm going to show you how this works in this environment. So when you go to shared with me on the left-hand side, this is everything that's been shared with me. Notice it's all just things that are shared by my other account, because really this is just an account that I made up. But the most recent one is the spreadsheet that I just shared. So this helps to organize them in Google Drive. You can also copy them into your main drive, right? So if we right click on it, we could add a shortcut to Drive. That's how you do it there. And then that will be linking to this. So it'll be the same file, but you can just see it if all of your workflow is in the Drive and you have a folder structure that you'd like to work with. That's what you would do, but we're going to leave it here. We'll double click on it to open it in Sheets. And Sheets looks a little bit different on the right because of the other people that are in the sheet are the person in this account. So these icons, you see this is an M, and then this is a picture of me. I just never uploaded a picture to the Michael account. But this is where you can see the other people that you're sharing this with. So there's one other person. You can chat directly with them here if you click on that. But what the comment only permission does is if you wanted to do something like, say, about that particular cell, and I can direct this to me, I can say, this looks too high. And if I assign that to Adam Steinfurth, it seems important, right? I'm giving myself an assignment. If I come over to my sheet here, oh, I'm on the wrong tab. I'll go to the unformatted tab, which is where the other person is. And I see that there's a comment. They said it looks too high. I can hit a reply here. I should probably do the best practice and assign it to him. And reassign to Michael. And Michael comes over, so it sees that I said it was okay. So he's going to click his check, and it resolves that comment and it goes away. So when you are collaborating in Google Drive, the comment feature gives a lot of nice structure to a dialogue where you can talk about specific things in Google Sheets and resolve them. But since I gave this Michael comments only, if I go into cell, let's say F9, I don't even see it on the left-hand side. So I can see a person that has edit privileges. You can see their active cell move around, but you can't see that for someone that just has commenting privileges, because you can be in their cell and it doesn't matter. But if I go into F9 and I start typing, nothing happens. So you can't edit the sheet. Now let's do one thing else. If you go and you share and you want to give Michael access, but you want to control it a little bit, so we will change him to editor. We'll click save. And now let's refresh Michael's so it doesn't say comment only. Okay, there we go. Now both active cells are being shown on both screens. And if I go into F12 and I type DDD and hit enter, it does edit the cell, so it updates the contents. We'll go in here and we will delete this. And then one extra thing that I wanted to show you is I said that we wanted to give Michael edit access, but we do want to control it a little bit. So let's go back to Adam's account here. And let's say we don't want him to modify the formatted version. It just looks too nice. Let's say you spent a lot of time on it and you're proud of it. What you can do is you can click on that arrow and do protect sheet. And then you can enter a description for that range, but you can take the entire sheet. Let's just call it important. Set permissions on it, and you can remove edit access from Michael on the entire sheet, or you can do it just within a range of the sheet. But we'll do it for the entire sheet and click done. And all of the styling in the menu bar is grayed out now, so you can't change it. So Michael can use the other worksheets, but just not this one. All right, so let's go look at some of the other options in sharing. That covers sharing with specific people, but you can also share with groups. So let's go back to Drive. We will click on these 9 dots and we will look at the concept of groups. And in here we've named 2 marketing groups for some reason and production. These each have an email address associated with them. We will go back to Sheets. Let's say we want to share this with the marketing group. And that email address comes up. You can see that it's a group based on this icon here. We'll left click on it. And this is a similar thing where you can give that entire group, let's just give them viewer permissions and say something like, oh, here's the quarterly marketing report, right? Even though what's in the spreadsheet is inventory data. We'll ignore that. What you could do, you could change this. You could share it with production, right? Production. There. So you can share with individual people or groups with that, what I'm calling the first option. But if you go down, so I just went back, this is the sharing window that comes up. The second option is called general access. So this is how you control what happens when anyone goes to this link. All right, so when you look up in the address bar, this long string of characters here identifies this specific spreadsheet. And you can tell Sheets, hey, look, if anyone on the internet comes to that URL, you would have had to give it to them because it's long and random. They're not going to guess it. This is what I want to have happen. So when you look down here, this right now is set to anyone with the link can be a viewer. So I take most of my spreadsheets, I give it that setting because I'll do a video or write a web page and I want to share the spreadsheet with them. So this spreadsheet is shared from several different pages. And what I've done is I've said, clicked on this and you can do, you can lock it down and say, anyone that comes to the link, it doesn't matter. You have to just look at these permissions above. Okay, so that's not what I've done. That's the most restrictive. The second one is control it where anyone at your company gets a specific type of treatment. But the widest one is anyone with the link. So that's what we have right now. And then you'll probably recognize these roles, right? What I've done is anyone with a link can see it. So I make them a viewer. Let's copy this link and I'll show you what that does. So if you open up, we'll do an incognito window. So this is just a window in Google Chrome that doesn't know who's using it. So it's not signed into a Google account. If you come to that window and you paste the link to that spreadsheet in, you're able to see it. You have to sign in to be able to copy it, but you can move around. You can go to different worksheets, and Google at this point doesn't even know who you are. You're not logged into a Google account. And if you go to File, if you were signed in, you could make a copy. So that's what I tell most of the people that that use my spreadsheets is that you make a copy, it goes into your own Google Drive, and you have a completely independent copy at that point that you have full permissions to. So we will close this and we'll just look at one more thing. And this can be an important consideration depending on what you're doing, but that least restrictive, so the most permissive permissions called an editor, they can also change the permissions for other people and they can share it. That's turned on by default, so just keep that in mind. And then this, you can control whether the viewers and commenters can see the option to download, print, and copy. I've always left these on, but you may want to turn them off for different reasons. So that covers how to share your spreadsheet. Next, we'll go to a bit more of an advanced level and talk about how to create your own functions. I'll see you in that video. Thanks for watching. It's nice to have you along.